Good evening and welcome to the sixth show in our series, History of the Jewish State in Israel. I apologize if I have not returned your texts or calls this week, but the response to the shows has been remarkable. There is a thirst for truth and knowledge in a world inundated with lies and falsehoods. This series hopefully is helping some people gain distance out of the darkness and into the world of facts and truth. To assist in this process, we will be emailing segments of these shows to thousands of people like you or anyone who is interested in these shows. We will be sending it through email, and you can get it through email at the email blueandwhitefacts@gmail.com. I'm going to repeat that. blueandwhitefacts@gmail.com. No spacing. Moreover, we will leave a few minutes at the conclusion of each show for questions or comments. You can reach us at the studio at 718-303-9090. At 718-303-9090. And now a few additional words about Muhammad. As we have reported, Muhammad was born in 571 CE, 500 years after the destruction of the Second Jewish Temple in Jerusalem, and after nearly 1,400 years of a continuous Jewish state in Israel. Important fact to remember. Muhammad was impressed by the monotheism of Judaism and its religious fervor as practiced particularly in Mecca and Medina. And often he clung to these monotheistic beliefs and presented his newly developed religious views to the Jews and Christians of Mecca. His views were not initially accepted, and he departed Mecca. By 610 CE, Muhammad was promoting a renewed religion which contained elements of the Jewish orientation. Muhammad was then not embraced by the Jews of Medina either, and by 630 CE had returned to Mecca with an army and attacked the city. Shortly after, a jihad was declared, bringing the whole world under Islamic control. As has been mentioned earlier in this series, it is not clear whether Muhammad ever came to Jerusalem, and Muslims, we know, pray facing away from Jerusalem. Moreover, Jerusalem is not mentioned in the Quran, yet it is mentioned over 700 times in our Tanakh. Yes, any thoughts did you like to add at this point?
Oh, I think this history of Muhammad really gives insight into the overall theme of, understanding really his place in history and how that relates to the overall issue of the struggle today. So I think those insights are really important. So I'm going to go a little off script here, Ari and I. And number one, we wanted to recognize today Bob Yu and the tremendous. You are really the driving force behind the show, and we all appreciate you very much. And we wanted to wish you on this special day a happy birthday.
Thank you.
And a thank you to you. So just to summarize last week, I spoke about the anti-Semitic propagandists and how they use pictures and words to send very powerful false messages to the masses through social media, through the newspapers, through political cartoons, and that the old false accusations and lies of Jews valuing money over human life is back. But now we have a new lie. And the new lie is the preposterous notion that Israel is some kind of racist state. But these are all just words and images. As they say in Yiddish, tum fakert. Just the opposite is true. The data and the facts tell a completely different story. They tell a story of the state of Israel, the country of kindness. We spoke last week that over the past 70 years, the IDF has provided humanitarian aid on a global level to any country in need on 6 different continents, regardless of race, nationality, or the past history that country had with the Jewish people. We mentioned the aid and humanitarian aid that Israel has offered even to Islamic countries, including the story of Operation Good Neighbor, where they helped the people from Syria who are in need of medical care and other assistance. We spoke about the aid that Israel has given to the Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank, how they've been the beneficiaries of jobs, medical training in Israel. They get the best from Israeli hospitals, and they have promoted Gazan independence, economic independence. And this is all true because Israel, like the United States, is grounded in Judeo-Christian values, the values of the equality of man, and the values of God-given human rights. Today I wanted to talk about a couple of organizations that do humanitarian work, because maybe you'll say, listen, maybe it's just the Army of Israel that does the humanitarian work. Maybe it's for political reasons. But if there are organizations that are run by Israeli and Arab citizens within Israel, that means that it's not just for political reasons. It means that it's part of the heart of the nation. And I think that learning about these organizations, you'll see the heart of the people of the state of Israel. So the first organization I wanted to talk about is an organization called Mashav. It's the Agency for International Development Cooperation, and it's part of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, just the history of this organization. In 1955, there was a conference called the Bandung Conference, and it was a conference of nations from Africa and Asia, and they were trying to work on helping developing countries and create a system of an economy. And actually, interestingly, Israel was excluded from this conference. They were originally invited, but the Arab nations threatened to boycott the conference if Israel was invited, so Israel was not invited. 3 years later, under the initiative of Golda Meir, after a visit to Africa, she created this organization called Mashav. And I think it's interesting, her actual words of why they created this organization. She said, Mashav is an expression of an empathy with victims of oppression, discrimination, and slavery. I'm going to say that again. Mashav is an expression of an empathy with victims of oppression, discrimination, and slavery. And more so, over time, Mashav grew because of repeated requests on the part of people who freed themselves from the yoke of colonialism and were seeking true independence. So we have two aspects over here that are actually the opposite of exactly what the anti-Semites of today are proposing. They created this humanitarian force in Israel because of the oppression and the slavery that was going on in Africa, and it was to help people who were who basically were under the hand of colonizers, which is the opposite. It's the opposite of what's being claimed over here. Now, Mashav, their focus is that they pass on the knowledge that Israel has in different fields like agricultural, education, and medicine over to these developing countries. They have trained over 270,000 professionals from more than 132 countries. By 2010, I'm sure by now it's much more, Mashav had trained 250,000 students in Africa. That's 250,000 students in Africa in education, health, sciences, and agriculture. And most recently, they sent over 100 tons of humanitarian aid to Ukraine. They are currently just a few developing countries that they're in. They're in Rwanda, teaching them about agricultural technology and top modern, best farming practices, and developing modern irrigation systems. They're in Kenya, helping them reduce pollution and protect a very important water source called Lake Victoria by reducing the pollution and improving the water quality. They're in Myanmar, empowering women to become farmers and training them in entrepreneurial techniques so that they connect small farms to the greater economy. And these are just some of many, many things that Mashav is doing. And they've even been in Ukraine for a number of years, helping develop so that families could increase income and develop the rural economy from the farming that's there. They've been in Ethiopia helping with the avocado farms. They've been all over the world in these developing countries, basically just helping them, become independent, and so that the citizens could have a great life. So that's Mashav. The next organization I wanted to talk about was IsraAid. IsraAid is a not-for-profit, and it's a coalition of a bunch of Israeli organizations that help with disaster relief. Just one example is their expertise is working with refugees and displaced people. Colombia, Kenya, Germany, Greece, the southern Sudan, Uganda, and they've really mastered helping refugees. They start off with providing emergency relief and eventually help these communities with long-term reintegration and developing resilience. They do this by including the refugees actually in their planning teams, and that helps them develop empowerment, and they're also involved in combating gender-based violence, promoting child protection, developing sanitation, and providing employment opportunities. In 2021, after the Taliban took over, they evacuated 167 Afghans and took them to Albania, where there were already 650 refugees there. To this day, this moment, right now, they are still supporting not only the 167 people that they brought, but the additional 650 that were there before, in security measures, protection, education, and health. In Uganda in 2015, they realized that a lot of these refugees were children. And they realized that children who are refugees, they're deprived of having real childhood experiences because of the trauma that they're going through and just practically living day to day. So they realized that they had to develop these places called child-friendly spaces, where they organize activities for the children. They have the opportunity to play and socialize and learn and have freedom of self-expression. They provide psychosocial support, and they strengthen the cohesion amongst the children so that they could have that sense of community. Now, I wanted to pause here for a second because I think this shows the tremendous empathy that the organization has, because these organizations could just get stuck and satisfied with just saving these refugees and getting them to a safe place. But having the empathy to jumping into the experience of the people shows an even higher level of care that the state of Israel has for these people, these refugees, who are very different from them, come from a completely different culture that they don't know before. When there was unrest in Venezuela and the people had to escape to Colombia, there was tremendous, they had double digits unemployment rates and no legal status to get medical services. Israel provided these medical services as well as providing training for them in leadership, communication, and business practices. In a country called Vanuatu, which is a little east off the coast of Australia, there were 300,000 inhabitants there that needed mental health services. So Israel came and they trained and mentored volunteers there, and they provided a system of mental health and psychosocial support for that country. There's a lot of talk today by the social activists, especially in this country, about gender-based violence. In South Sudan, the numbers a few years ago, before COVID, 65% of women and girls in South Sudan are reportedly victims of gender-based violence. And during COVID, I guess people spent a little too much time at home, it increased by 300%, according to the data from the country. So Israel, they provided what they called women and girl-friendly spaces, where hundreds of women came to receive support, counseling, group activities for trauma relief, and employment training. A third, last organization I wanted to mention was United Hatzalah, which provides emergency medical services, medical care, humanitarian aid, and psychological first aid. They flew to Haiti more than once, Nepal in 2015. They responded to the hurricanes Irma and Harvey in the United States. In 2022, they were on the ground in Moldova and Ukraine, providing medical and human aid and food. And they went to hospitals and communities inside Ukraine, extracting the injured and ill refugees to bring them to other countries to receive treatment. And they transported 3,000 refugees from Ukraine to Israel. Most recently, in September, after the earthquakes in Morocco, they went there to aid in search and rescue. And these are just three organizations, but they show that at the heart of Israel is a very wonderful, kind country that genuinely cares about other people. Before I turn it over to Ari, I just wanted to mention, Golda Meir, that quote from her that we mentioned before, that Mashav was an expression of an empathy with victims of oppression, discrimination, and slavery. You know why I think that was already in Golda Meir's heart? It's because the Jews were victims of oppression, discrimination, and slavery a few years before that in the Holocaust. And I think it's important that when someone goes through oppression and slavery and discrimination, there's one of two things could happen. Either they could strike back out of anger, and because they went through that pain and terrible experience, they're going to put someone else through it, or they could be like the state of Israel, and they could expand their empathy for mankind and expand their behavior towards humanity and mankind and bring tikkun olam.
Great job. Riveting.
Thank you, Yitzi. So you touched on organizations. We're going to look a little bit today about how we're going to try to answer the question: is Israel an apartheid state? Because we hear that a lot. It's especially relevant now that South Africa has brought allegations of genocide against Israel in the International Court of Justice. So we need to define what apartheid is first, because we hear code words that are used in protests and in the media, and all of these code words start to really lose their meaning. And as an example, South Africa, again, they're alleging that Israel is committing genocide. So that's another word, genocide, which means something very specific. And to be, for Israel to be accused of committing genocide, and yet the number of Palestinian refugees has only grown. Usually genocide does the opposite. Numbers of people who are genocide committed against them goes down. The refugees have grown in number almost 9 times since 1948, from 700,000 to just almost 6 million. And so it's important to realize, to note that civilian deaths is not the same as genocide. Civilian deaths is a tragedy. We're not denying that that's happening. But civilian deaths is not the same as genocide. And so the same thing, apartheid means something very specific. So what did it mean in South Africa? This is from dictionary.com if you want to look it up. A rigid former policy of segregating and economically and politically oppressing the non-white population. That's definition number 1. Definition number 2, any system or practice that separates people according to color, ethnicity, caste, etc. And this is from Wikipedia. I'll read: apartheid was a system of institutionalized racial segregation that existed in South Africa and Southwest Africa from 1948 to the early 1990s. Now, apartheid, what does that mean? It actually comes from Afrikaans, which is a language spoken in South Africa, which is aparthood. So in Afrikaans, it's apartheid. What did that mean practically? Now, this was in the South African legislation. Blacks were separated from whites, so that was in schools and bathrooms. Blacks were not allowed to vote, to own land, engage in certain professions. They were not allowed to conduct business with whites. They could not marry whites. They even had a completely separate transportation system. In America, we know that blacks were only allowed on the back of the bus. Now, here, they had completely separate buses, and certainly were not allowed to live next to whites. So the question is, what about Israel? Because we keep hearing Israel's an apartheid state. You see it in protests, you see it signs. Israel's an apartheid state. So does Israel, like South Africa, have a segregation policy? Is there a systematic oppression of a minority population like South Africa? So for starters, let's look at, because again, apartheid was in legislation, so let's look at Israel's Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence from Israel says that the state of Israel, quote, will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture, end quote. What does that mean? Israeli Arabs and Israeli Jews are treated equally under the law. They go to the same hospitals. They go to the same schools. They have the exact same rights. That was not what was true for blacks in South Africa. There are today 10 current Arab members of parliament, and in total there were 90 past members. So we're talking 100 Arab members of parliament since the first Knesset elections in 1949. There was no such thing as being a black parliament member in South Africa. Arabs have been elected to the Israeli Supreme Court, and Arabs serve side by side with Jews in the Israeli army. And so I want to be clear, because I think this is where it gets murky. Settlements and issues with security and how they impact Arabs living in the West Bank have nothing to do with apartheid. I think that's where it gets a little murky for people, because It is tricky. That's maybe for a different show, because when you're talking about the West Bank, people forget Israel does not have complete authority over the West Bank. It's been divided into 3 sections, A, B, and C. You have to also understand, you have to talk about the Oslo Accords and the Intifadas. So that's a separate issue. But looking at Israel itself, within Israel, if apartheid is institutionalized racism, there is no institutionalized racism within Israel. And I think this is where it also gets murky. There's this idea that Israel has been settled by white Europeans who are now oppressing the non-white minority of Arabs. It's completely false. First of all, more than half of the Jews living in Israel are from the Middle East and North Africa. They are not white, putting in quotation marks, white. And as we discussed in another show, these Jews are either refugees or descendants of refugees who were ethnically cleansed from Arab countries. So we have to repeat again. I think it's worth just, again, all Israeli citizens have equal rights, regardless of race, religion, country of origin, ethnicity, or any other demographic attribute you want to throw out there. That is not apartheid. Israel is not an apartheid state. And so just to offer a little bit of an opinion here, just to go off, off the facts, what's going on with South Africa? I look at it this way. It seems to me that South Africa views the situation of the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza through the lens of its own ugly history of apartheid and discrimination against blacks. And it also seems to me that they somehow are trying to right their historical wrongs by projecting their crimes onto Israel. So it's misguided, and as I hope we've shown tonight, it's just historically and factually wrong. So I'm going to turn it back over to Bob.
Fascinating presentations, as has been every week. Hope everyone is learning from them and being able to dissemble the lies that have been taught and demonstrated on TV and in the media, and is beginning to see what the truth is. You can reach us, remember, either to get our materials once this series is over. We will be sending out materials so that people will have access to the facts and material that we have presented in this series, and you will be able to have a shortened version of that at your disposal if you give us your email and send it to blueandwhitefacts@gmail.com. That's blueandwhitefacts@gmail.com, with no separation between the words. We hope you'll also be able to send in comments and suggestions and thoughts you have about anything else that you'd like us to cover. We are trying to cover many of the most important topics that would be helpful for us to be able to use in discussing what is going on in the Middle East and in Israel particularly. So if you have some thoughts and some ideas, we would be very appreciative that you send it to us. We have a number of additional shows to go, and we hope that you are enjoying the ones you have listened to, and look forward to speaking with you again, God willing, next Thursday. Now, next Thursday, we will be on at 9:30 instead of 10 o'clock. Okay, I just want to repeat that. Next Thursday, and thereafter, we'll be on at 9:30 instead of 10 o'clock. So we will speak to you, and hope you enjoy the show next week, and have a good week. Take care. And remember, Am Yisrael Chai.